こんにちは、皆さん。ビジネスサクセスジャパンのポッドキャストへようこそ。Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Business Success Japan podcast. This is your host, Liddy Buchelman. My main goal here is to create an easily accessible resource for those who want to develop Japan-specific communication skills, especially in business. While I can't and won't promise to make you fluent in Japanese, I hope that you will walk away from each episode with a skill, piece of information, or shift in mindset that will help you be more effective in your interactions with Japanese business people. Today's guest is Ken Okamoto, a Japanese native and global citizen. He is a qualified financial analyst with a range of experiences living and working abroad. He's passionate about using his skills and experiences to help foreigners find success in Japan, and I'm very excited to share his insights into Japanese business meetings and Japanese corporate culture with you today. But first, I want to take a quick second to thank another person who has taken the time to rate and review the podcast. Blue Jazz Studios left a review that says, "Good information on Japan." Since I'm always looking for information on Japan, it was nice to stumble on a podcast that delivers practical insider advice. The earlier podcasts are good for when you're on the plane over to Japan. The later long-form episodes have great in-depth insight with smart interviews. Highly recommend. So the person who left this review is named Michael Foster. He is a Chicago artist and designer passionate about Japanese culture with a new book out on Amazon, and you should go ahead and follow him on LinkedIn because he posts a lot of great art that is Japan inspired, and I always look forward to seeing that on my feed. So you should definitely go check him out on LinkedIn. That's Michael Foster. Thanks again for the review. But before we get into the interview today, let's quickly go over a little bit of Japanese. In the previous episode, we learned a uniquely Japanese term that refers to what someone is really feeling or thinking. Honne. Ho-n-ne. Honne. Today, we'll look at the flip side of that concept. Tatemae. Ta-te-ma-e. Tatemae. Tatemae refers to what one shows as their official opinion or thoughts. We'll cover these terms a little bit more later on in the episode, so be sure to listen closely for that. Alright, so now let's get into today's interview.
My name is Ken. I'm a corporate financial analyst and a leader consultant slash work-life balance consultant. And I have worked for startups and S&P 500 biotech company and European global company as a financial professional. Now I'm helping entrepreneurs build financial models and brush up on leader skills.
So then, can you tell us a little bit about your history with Japan?
Yeah, sure. My nationality is Japanese, but I spent my childhood in New Delhi, India, and Tokyo, Japan. I have worked in Japan for 10 years as a financial professional. Then afterwards, I moved to Canada to go back to college in Canada, Toronto. And due to the COVID-19, I came back to Japan 6 months ago.
So what was it like being raised in India then? Was that most of your childhood, or was it kind of shared between the two countries?
No, it was so short time. It was like I was there just until 5 years old. So I don't remember any native language there, but I have some kind of intense memory, and I have still have Indian tastes. So that's why. So somehow I love Indian food. Yeah, but it was good experience because maybe just because of that experience, I got some kind of global mindset when I was a child. So yeah, it was good experience to me.
But culturally, you would still consider yourself Japanese more than anything else?
No, really. So because I lived in different countries, because I live in India, of course, I identify myself as a global person, not just one nationality, because because of that experience. And these days, I believe that we cannot say just yeah, we can say I'm from blah 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 country, but I would like to say that we are living in the same planet. So I always say that I'm a global person. Yeah.
I think that's getting to be a more common mindset, which is really awesome.
Right, right. These days, particularly we need to work with people from different countries. So as long as we can use, English or yeah, another common language, we can live together and work together.
So, can you tell us a little bit more specifically about the work that you're doing? You're starting a bit more of the one on one consulting work. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm focusing on helping entrepreneurs and small companies through my financial skills and global skills, along with work-life balance advice. Because you know reason why I'm saying that work-life balance advice is that this is my based on experience. When I worked as a financial analyst, once I got burned out because long hours at Japanese company, and so on top of that, when I lived in Canada, people have great work-life balance. So I kind of realized that it's quite important to have work-life balance so that we can perform very well. So it's not just having knowledge or just not hard skills or soft skills, but at the same time we need to have a good life-work balance. So in that those kind of things, I'm trying to give advice for entrepreneurs and small companies because I know particularly startup they require kind of sometimes long hours and so hard work, of course, because this is a starting point, right? But at the same time, we kind of needed to rest at the same time because simply our brain cannot work 24 hours. So definitely we needed to kind of take care of our mental and physical body as well. So yeah, those kind of things I'm providing advice, not just financial knowledge was any data. And at the same time, right now, I'm writing articles focusing on business culture to support professionals. So you can check out on my LinkedIn account.
So, how does that go over with more startup businesses, telling them that they need to work less? Is that something that they're receptive to? Do they tend to push back on that? How do they usually react?
So it totally depends, but in the most cases, I don't just, push them, hey guys, you have to have a work-life balance. I don't say that bluntly. Just simply, firstly, I analyze what they are doing, which phase they are in right now. So if they are just starting right now, and when I interview with their employees, then I can sense that whether they feel kind of burdened or they enjoy it. So if they feel like burden they have, then I'm telling them, hey, Mr. XYZ, your employees seems like kind of fatigue, so you need to take into account their mental health as well. That kind of things. When I tell them, because I explain that logically, they understand that. So it totally depends on the situation of the company.
So
Mm.
then, Japan is very notorious for all of those long work hours, even outside of startups. So,
Mm.
why do you think Japan specifically has such a hard time with this overworking culture?
That's kind of tough to answer. It's simply say that this is typical Japanese corporate culture, but I would say that because of our history. So particularly after World War II, we had a kind of growing rapidly growing business environment. So at that time, particularly 90s or 80s or 90s, simply the more we work long hours, the more we could get performance and we could earn more money at that time. But yeah, this kind of history makes that kind of not a good Japanese corporate culture. Yeah. particularly these days, still many senior professionals have that kind of custom here.
So you said that Japanese companies or Japanese people worked hard before because the harder you worked, the more you could earn, the better output you could have. What changed? Is it because we moved from industry or industrial output to more of a knowledge economy that doesn't work so well anymore?
Yeah, as you may know, so we have kind of blank period for 10 years or 20 years after that rapidly growing business period. Simply, it doesn't work at all these days. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain that, but maybe because these days we need to have we need to have business with different countries. So in that case, we need to kind of adapt different perspective, different approach, way of approach to solve the problem, which means we need to adapt our business models, of course. But unfortunately, Japan is island, so it's kind of hard to kind of get different perspectives. So, but thanks to IT development and more and more younger people have worked or studied abroad in other countries. So these days, younger kind of startups or younger companies, younger professionals have global mindset these days. So they are trying to shift work efficiently, not just work hard, but work smart these days.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So then in Japan, since you've had experience in different countries and how people work in different countries, what would you say the role is that meetings specifically play in Japanese companies versus other countries? What's different about Japanese meetings?
So in traditional corporate Japanese corporate culture, it plays many things. One is it plays majority of work hours, which means so in traditional Japanese corporate culture, having many meetings implies that you work hard, and each meeting has long hours. So people would say that, okay, you have a lot of meetings and long hours. Oh, you are super busy, despite the results. So that kind of strange things would be happening. That's a one thing. And another thing is meetings is kind of consensus place, meaning professionals who have traditional Japanese work style would like to get consensus officially. So this, for example, I'm proposing ABC kind of solution, but I don't want to say that this is just my opinion, but I'd like to get consensus within the team. Maybe because of this is kind of Japanese culture, because of we are now in living in island, so that we kind of try to avoid conflicts from other people. And so, yeah, unfortunately, that's why sometimes there is a meeting for a meeting. So, for example, some kind of head of departments tended to have a meeting, or country management tended to have a meeting to report to upper hierarchy, simply because they are kind of afraid of being judged. So that's why. So sometimes there is a meeting for a meeting. I know it sounds like not efficient, but yeah, it's happening here still. And another thing is there are a lot of routine communication plays, like weekly or bi-weekly or monthly meetings, so that we can share progresses. So it's more like not just discussing, but we try to share any information at meetings.
Mhm.
So yeah, these kind of things are kind of a Japanese meeting style. So on top of that, typical Japanese, not typical, I don't say that. Many Japanese professionals inclined to have as many participants as possible. because simply, as I said, they would like to get consensus officially within the team, even though these people are not the key persons. But yeah, they didn't invite participants as many as possible. Yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, since we have many long hour meetings, which means it's leading to long hours as a result. So that's why. So, typical, stereotypical kind of sense in Japan. So our work hours would is like 12 hours or 14 hours a day on average. So yeah.
I would say that would be typical.
Yeah, still it's typical. But that being said, that younger startups where management is younger have less meetings and shorter meetings because simply they have worked or studied in other countries. That's why so they know we should work efficiently. So they are trying to have less than 45 minutes meeting, and before the meeting, they are trying to identify agendas, what kind of topics we should decide within 45 minutes. So on top of that, they are trying to have less attendees. So this kind of trend is happening right now, particularly at startups, younger startups. So of course, it depends on the industry, but in my opinion, this kind of trend is happening in IT industry particularly because simply a lot of IT companies have foreigners, not just Japanese.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Tends to be younger, tends to be more diverse. So
Right, exactly.
moving away from the traditions seems kind of inevitable in those situations.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, there are pros and cons on the both sides, traditional work style and the modern work style. But we need to kind of pivot our thinking way as well so that we can work efficiently and yeah.
That's interesting to me because when you say that Japanese companies have so many meetings, if you look at any sorts of business publications in America,
Mhm.
they're always complaining about meetings too, that there are too many. There's people there that don't need to be there. They're long. Is it just
Mm.
on a whole other level in Japan that Americans can't even imagine then? Or,
Mm. That's interesting. I didn't know that, to be honest, a lot, even in the USA, there are a lot of meetings. But
yeah,
what do you think about that as a, US citizen?
we focus more on maybe brainstorming, trying to get everybody on the same page, that sort of thing, rather than consensus seeking, I think.
Okay, okay, okay. The purpose is totally different,
Yes.
right? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, to do brainstorming, you have meetings with a lot of attendees. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious about that myself.
Mm. But it doesn't happen, not just doesn't happen, based on my experience. Yeah, most typical, Japanese company have meetings just to get consensus.
So we kind of before narrowed down into three terms that we wanted to talk about in relation to business meetings. So
Hmm.
the first one was Honne,
Hmm.
Tatemae, and then Nemawashi. Could
Mm.
you tell us a little bit about these three terms and what they have to do with business meetings?
Okay, so these are just two words of actually. So honne and tatema is one phrase. So honne and tatema is kind of a polite way to hide negative opinions. So it's like a white lie in English. So yeah, and the nemawashi is that kind of you get approval from all stakeholders, not just from a decision maker. So in a meeting, you kind of witness some honne and tatemae. So be careful in Japanese, not Japanese, yeah, sometimes you cannot take 100% straightforward. Hey, Ken, your proposal sounds great. This is a good idea. Amazing. You cannot take that 100% straightforward. Sometimes they are saying that. However, underneath, they might think, aha, uh, it might be a good idea, but there are some problems there. So we need to consider that kind of things is happening. Yeah, it's not a lie, but yeah, just they are trying to nice.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
So,
yeah,
so then Honne
yeah,
is what they're actually thinking, and Tatemae is what they're saying, correct?
yeah. You can say that. Yes.
Yeah, just to remember it a little more easily.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So I'd say Honne and Tatema is white lie. I'd say that. Yeah. Yeah, bit. Yeah, but yeah, what you are saying is right.
Mhm.
And Nemawashi is in the meeting. So particularly for traditional Japanese companies, Nemawashi is quite important. So before, as I said before meetings, you better to get consensus or discuss with participants to get consensus. Otherwise, the meeting itself doesn't work. This is Nemawashi. So it's kind of pains, but yeah, sometimes you need to understand how important Nemawashi is so that we can proceed meetings efficiently and smoothly.
Nemawashi doesn't just involve people kind of going up the hierarchy. It involves kind of everybody in the organization, correct?
Everybody in the office, yeah, in the office or in the yeah in your team, yeah. So that's why. So sometimes you need to have meetings for meetings.
Mhm.
Yeah, which is kind of time consuming, and some people would say that it's not efficient, but yeah, to be honest, it is what it is in traditional Japanese companies.
So then another thing that I've heard from foreigners who have gone to Japan is that they've encountered Nemawashi when they
Mm,
go to a meeting with a Japanese company, they're trying to convince them of something. But
mm,
then, no matter how well they presented, no matter what arguments they gave, in the
mm,
end, the answer had already been decided ahead of time because of this Nemawashi. And
mm,
that
mm,
kind of made it difficult for them to work well with Japanese companies because no matter what they did, no matter what arguments they presented,
mm.
everything was already decided. So
Mm.
that's a kind
Yeah,
of
that could be happening. Yeah, totally, I understand that.
Mhm.
That's why so it's quite important to connect with not just key persons, but person who kind of have influence at Japanese companies. I know this is kind of difficult to figure out, but yeah, you need to kind of discuss with that person before a meeting. Yeah, that's quite crucial.
So that's interesting because in America we tend to rely more on meetings for
Mm.
decision making or for guiding decision making. So then what should foreigners do to try to actually work together with Japanese people outside of meetings?
That's difficult question because it's kind of depends on the company and the situation. But I would say it's kind of again pain their neck, but you better to have kind of pre-meeting before the meetings. I mean, so you better to have a meeting with some not just some key persons to discuss. Hey, Ken, we are going to propose these projects, and what do you think about that? Okay, I'm thinking you better to explain this, and in this way, I answer that. Then they are taking it. Then they would be able to ask me, for example, Ken, before the actual meeting, could you tell our, could you tell something, blah, 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 to your colleagues, something like that. So having meeting a meeting would be sometimes required.
Okay. So you also
Yeah.
have to try to initiate pre-meetings at a more
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Unfortunately. Yeah. Of course, if the case is in new startup, the younger corporate culture, it's not necessary to do that. It totally depends on the company. But if the your counterparts is traditional Japanese culture they have, then it might be required.
So is that kind of the role that nomikai and those sorts of meetings play, or is this a totally separate thing?
I would say it depends. If you are talking about external nomikai, then it might be better to have nomikai. It's like we called it settai, so that you can treat your clients, your suppliers, something like that before we are doing actual work together. But in the internal environment, which means you are having nomikai with your colleagues, it's more like having nomikai in your team makes you kind of part of your team as well. Yeah, simply they can kind of get to know each other, right? So, but these days, I feel like there are less nomikai at kind of modern or younger startups because simply they care about not care about, but they kind of try to have time with their family as well. So, but still, at typical, yeah, traditional Japanese companies, there would be a lot of nomikai.
So then at the actual meetings,
Mhm.
since Japanese people may be doing honne and tatemae, how
Mhm.
in the world can somebody who isn't Japanese understand what's actually going on? How can you know what people are actually thinking if they're saying something different than what they're actually thinking?
That's so difficult question because even I'm Japanese, sometimes it's hard to read that. But if you can do read the cookie, cookie means it's vibe there. So if they get convinced that you can feel that. But otherwise, if you cannot feel that kind of sounds, I would suggest that try to sum up after the meeting. So, which means following up with meeting minutes. Hey guys, we talked about this. Then, so I would suggest that for next meeting or for to conclude this meeting, please give us these answers by when. So this kind of following up would be effective and valid, I would say, if you can read the cook. And if you have, Japanese colleagues or Japanese professionals who are good at English, then simply you can ask them.
Mm.
Yeah. But, if you can bring me the recording at the meeting, I can maybe I can guess if that meeting went well or not. Yeah, I can give advice maybe. So, yeah, feel free to ask me.
So maybe just kind of practicing thinking back on what happened so you can like,
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, there is no one answer. If these things happening, then the meeting went well. I cannot say that. Even in your native language, it's kind of difficult, right?
mhm.
Otherwise, yeah, unless they said a clear answer. But yeah, unfortunately, even if some participants in the meeting said that, uh, as I said earlier, hey Ken, this is a good idea. Definitely, we are thinking positively, and we are going to consider it. But you cannot take that 100% again. It would be turning out opposite conclusion.
Mm.
So that's why so kind of following up is quite crucial to to get to know the progress and what they are thinking actually.
So then what are some things that foreigners can do that would make them more effective in a Japanese business meeting based on what you've seen in the past, like how foreigners or how Japanese people tend to have meetings versus what would be considered more acceptable in a business meeting in Japan?
Hmm. That's again a difficult question because it depends on the team and it depends on what kind of professionals are in the meetings. Because sometimes there are a lot of professionals who understand global meeting style and they need to understand different approach and different perspectives. But in general, I would say that you don't need to worry about too much Japanese style of meetings. I would say that simply foreigners can say out loud proactively, hey, we have this meeting, and so we need to discuss this. And if you have opposite opinion, you can say that out loud. Because simply, I believe that, of course, I understand foreigners try to understand Japanese meeting style, but at the same time, I believe that Japanese companies need to change their way of doing their business meeting at the same time. So I kind of, I hope that foreigners try to say out loud opposite opinions and what they are thinking so frankly. And if you are afraid of kind of being judged, or if you are afraid of making mistakes regarding Japanese business meeting style, you can simply use gaijin card effectively. So, it is kind of effective because many Japanese people understand. Uh, for example, if I'm not Japanese, so they would say that, yeah, Ken is not Japanese, so he, even if I'm saying or complaining or saying opposite opinions, they try to understand because I'm from different countries, I'm from different corporate culture. So in that case, they try to understand. So you can use gaijin card effectively. But be careful though, if you are having with higher kind of talented, experienced professionals at Japanese company, they can see and they understand what you really think, and so they don't care about not care they don't mind your background. Just they are focusing on what kind of proposal you will bring on the table and what kind of results they would bring it. So you cannot use always guiding card, but sometimes you can use guiding card effectively, I would say. Yeah. And another thing is, as I said earlier, following up is quite important with meeting minutes. So yeah, I would say these three things would be valid for foreigners.
So then what is kind of best practices for following up? Is it thanking them and providing a summary and then asking for almost a deadline for another follow-up? Is that usually how it works, or
Mm.
what's the
Yeah, it works, and it's quite important because, as you may know, not so many Japanese professionals use English so often. That's why, so they are sometimes misunderstand what you are saying in English. So for them, it's so helpful to get written English as a meeting minutes so that they can confirm what you are saying and what's going on at the meeting actually. So there would be, that's so helpful for each other.
I know if I were in their shoes, I would definitely want a written copy too in Japanese.
Right.
Makes me
Right. Yeah, it's totally understandable, right?
yes, 100%. So then it makes sense that Japanese meetings involving foreigners would kind of be on a spectrum where you have young startups that are more internationally minded, doing more international style meetings.
Mm,
And then on the other extreme would be super traditional meetings.
mm.
So if you had somebody maybe who works at a Japanese company, so they're sort of expected to abide by Japanese culture to an extent
Mm,
at a very traditional company,
mm.
what should they expect when they walk into a Japanese meeting?
Try to understand and try to kind of adapt you, your common sense in a business world that you have earlier, because these days a lot of things are changing rapidly, right? So it's not just technology, but the meetings as well. So the way of meetings is changing as well, because right now we can have meeting on online.
Right.
So in that sense, I always say that not just stick to Japanese meeting style or just global meeting style. I'd say it's kind of try to understand what participants want and to try to understand what kind of style the company has. So it's more like accept the environment itself.
So just try to be a little bit more flexible.
Right. Be flexible would be one of the best way to proceed business meeting well.
But still following up is important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, of course. It's not just maybe following up is quite important to any country, I believe so,
Yeah.
because just make sure, and so it's kind of evidence, right? Hey, Ken, we are talking about this, and I cannot say that, oh, I didn't say that, but there is evidence. Well, based on the record or based on the meeting minutes. So yeah, that's kind of for any situation.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how, because you've had experience working in Canada as well, so you kind of have seen how different countries structure their meetings.
Hmm.
What would you say the biggest difference is between Japanese style meetings and, I guess, Canadian style meetings? Is it just the pace? Are they more formal? Are they more structured? What would you think the biggest difference is? Is it the seating arrangement?
That's interesting because I don't have many Canadian work experience, but in my a few experience in Canada, I'd say that their meeting style is more like reaching a point efficiently. Whereas Japanese meetings, they are kind of try to fill up kind of a lot of details first, then trying to reach the conclusion within the meeting. So that kind of approach is totally different, one thing. And second thing is whereas Canadian or other country, I would say, they kind of talk with their senior professionals or supervisors straightforward what they are thinking. But in Japanese companies, they care about what senior professionals think. And so as a result, sometimes younger professionals cannot say opposite opinions at the meetings. So that kind of things are kind of different.
Is there anything else you think that people should know about business meetings before they enter into their first one in Japan?
I'll say, yeah, always try to kind of research and try to get understand what kind of companies or what kind of professionals, what kind of participants you are dealing with at the meeting, before the meeting, like by searching on LinkedIn account or websites or simply checking Glassdoor, what kind of corporate culture they have. Then you can kind of guess, okay, this kind company would be having typical Japanese corporate culture. Then you need to do Nemawashi first, and yeah, that kind of things. So being prepared is would be crucial.
So just kind of do a little bit of extra homework to understand what you're leading yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, until you kind of get used to that kind of environment, until you can kind of read the cookie during the meeting. Yeah.
Yes, that is the goal, but it does take some time to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, it's better to understand, better to be able to use Japanese language itself, because the more you can use Japanese language, the more the participants, I mean, Japanese participants feel safe and they can discuss proactively more.
So is the difficulty in those meetings a lot of times just comes down to language barriers? Is it people feeling a little bit uncomfortable with their English and they might have a harder time expressing themselves, so they might not say as much, or
It could be happening.
okay.
Yeah, of course, it depends on the person and depends on the company. But yeah, unfortunately there would be a language barrier. So always better to have local language knowledge, local language skills. But if you are talking with, professionals who have experience in other countries, of course you don't need to worry about it. But if you are dealing with kind of people who don't have experience in other countries, yeah, that might be difficult.
All right. So then moving on a little bit, as everybody is probably aware of by now, the population in Japan is quickly getting older. The workforce is rapidly getting smaller. And it's going to be even more important than ever for Japanese companies to start not only getting, but retaining foreign talent.
Mm.
Are there any things that non-Japanese people can do to be attractive to Japanese companies?
Difficult question again. But I would say that try to make multinational teams and the environment, and establish and support startups that have diverse culture. Because I believe that more and more, as you said, we need to have talented people, talented professionals from other countries. Otherwise, simply we cannot have, a task force or workforce in Japan. On top of that, there are a lot of talented people in other countries. So if we are looking at just Japanese labor markets, it doesn't make sense if you'd like to get talented and skilled professionals. So at the same time, I understand a lot of foreigners try to understand Japanese corporate culture, but at the same time, I believe that a lot of Japanese companies need to change themselves. So in that sense, I strongly suggest that foreigners to make multinational teams and environment. And please start up your own business with diverse corporate culture.
So you
Yeah.
think that things will change more rapidly if there's more businesses that start as international companies? You think that will have a bigger influence on the Japanese companies themselves?
Yeah, I believe so. Particularly this COVID-19 situation, so we have to change, right? On top of that, we need to work with different markets. Not to work, where we have to do business in different markets, not just Japan, not just Asia, but also Europe or North America. So I would say at the beginning, going back to the beginning, as I said, I identify myself as a global person. It's kind of same sense that we are living in on the same planet. So which means we can work everywhere. So regardless of your nationality, regardless of your background, it doesn't matter. What important is that we try to understand modern, kind of work style, lifestyle, and different corporate culture, different country culture, different perspectives, so that we can work together. So always we better to adapt the situation.
Because we were talking about before that companies want to have foreign talent. They like the idea of having foreign talent. They just have a hard time putting that into practice. Can you tell us a little bit why that is? Is it just logistics? Are people worried about changing their corporate culture? What tends to stand in the way from more traditional Japanese companies incorporating more foreign talent into their companies?
Mm, mm. That's an interesting question. That's interesting because I've heard that a lot of Japanese companies say that we'd like to hire kind of new blood from diverse environments to become diverse environments. But they are kind of always focusing on Japanese labor markets. Simply, maybe they are thinking about language barrier. That's the one thing to prevent from diverse society, diverse corporate culture. But I always say that if you are looking at diverse environments, you need to kind of adjust again different nationality, and you need to look at different labor market from USA, Europe, or other countries. But unfortunately, for typical traditional Japanese company, it's kind of difficult to adjust themselves because simply they are sometimes they are afraid of being changed by outside elements or outside people because it's kind of it might be sabotage their job itself, not sabotage, but yeah, it's not. They are thinking it would be negative impact on their corporate culture. Changing is quite difficult, right? Because it has both sides, pros and cons. So it's quite difficult to deal with and handle the situation. So that's why leadership is quite important, yeah, to lead the company.
And do you have any opinions on what might convince these companies to just sort of take the plunge and embrace these sort of changes? Will it just be seeing more examples, more successful examples? Will it be necessity like Japanese companies have only now started accepting working from home just because logistically it was the only way to get things done? How do you think Japanese companies will come to make these sorts of changes?
Yeah, one thing I would say that Japanese companies have to kind of adapt digitalization. This is crucial. If they can do that, there are a lot of opportunities to do their business on a global scale and to hire talented people from different countries. Yeah, so digitalization would be one of key elements to change their corporate culture.
And what does digitalization look like compared to how things are now? What do Japanese companies do now, or what haven't they kind of moved on from that are kind of the opposite?
That's quite difficult because right now it's in progress. Even though Japan has moving so slowly towards digitalization, but I'd say that, for example, we have Hanko system, as you may know. So even though we have a pandemic situation, because of the Hanko system, a lot of people have to go to the office just because they need to, stamp Hanko seal. So which puts them in danger, right? That kind of things need to be changed. But at the same time, some of traditional Japanese companies adapt electric signal system. So on top of that, like Toshiba or bigger companies in Japan try to provide digitalization consulting services. So yeah, definitely there are kind of outdated systems still, but at the same time, there are a lot of companies in Japan try to change the way it used to be.
Since it's all in progress right now.
Yeah, so it's kind of takes time, particularly as you may know, Japan has kind of that kind of slow moving custom, I would say. So it takes time.
So then another common thread throughout this conversation has been that there are pros and cons to changing. And
Mm.
I believe strongly that Japanese companies need to embrace this sort of change. But do you think anything might be lost along the way as these companies start to embrace a more international approach to doing business?
Things lost. I don't think to, it's matter of lost or gain.
Mhm.
Again, it's more like adapting.
Okay.
So it's more like creating and integrating, combining pros and cons and traditional work style and the modern work style. Then we can evolve other, work style, work corporate culture. So it's not like lost or gain, more like evolving, I would say.
So then, do you have any examples that you've seen? It could be friends, it could be people that you've worked with, of times that you've seen a communication breakdown in Japan due to these differences in culture.
Yeah, as I said earlier, there is some kind of issue due to difference in culture, like so get to the point approach versus feel the details then conclusion, which is Japanese corporate style. So that kind of issue would be happening, but I'd say it's more like not just due to different corporate culture, but more like there is a language barrier. So way of understanding what you're saying, it's not just like language skills. It's more like language, what kind of language you are using. For example, simply we cannot translate each English to each Japanese words because simply we have different language and we have different idiom, vocabulary, and we have different history behind the language. So it's kind of difficult to understand what you're saying exactly. That kind of things is happening a lot in a lot of meetings. So I would say language barrier would be one of different culture. Yeah, I would say so.
So, what do you think the solution is for that then?
Yeah, as I said, this is difficult really. Either way, a lot of Japanese companies kind of educate English skills and try to make people understand different country culture. For example, they can send their employees to foreign overseas branches to train or to see other worlds and try to kind of make them kind of having new sense of work style. So yeah, or for foreigners, maybe yeah, try to brush up on native, not native, local language skills. But again, it's not just language skills. Just it's more like feeling what you're saying. So yeah, just get used to it. Yeah. Unfortunately, I cannot say one answer here,
Mhm.
but it takes time again, and it's more like building trust relationship is quite important in any world, right? So it's interesting that even if we have, different language, somehow we can trust someone from other countries, right? Maybe you may have experienced that. I don't know. I cannot explain that. That's because of their advanced language skills. It's more like how you are saying what you are saying and how you act for other people. Then you can trust that person. I strongly believe that. So action is quite important element, even in the meetings. So you are trying to support them, what you are trying to understand, and you are trying to kind of do for them. Then you can build trust relationship, which brings to successful business meetings in any country. I believe so.
That makes a lot of sense, which is why, especially in Japan, those events like nomikai and just spending time together, having long relationships is just such an important part of being successful in Japan.
Yeah, it is. But actually, I'm not a big fan of nomikai, to be honest, because it totally depends. But a lot of cases, nomikai is just like having a fun time. Of course, it might be good things, of course, but sometimes it's kind of meaningless would be. So it's more like I'd say not just doing participate nomikai, as I said earlier, more like try to build trusted relationships by kind of asking or by talking to your colleagues and support by trying to support their work. That kind of things would be more important than nomikai.
Be a trustworthy partner, be a good partner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course, sometimes nomikai would be fine. Yeah, but it's not 100%. I wouldn't say this is a greatest idea. I wouldn't say that.
It's not very good for your liver either.
Yeah.
So then if you were speaking to somebody who is going over to Japan for business for the first time and you
Mm.
really only had time to teach them one thing, what would
Mm.
you want to teach them?
One thing. Oh man.
No pressure.
I'd say that try to understand that your common business sense in your country might not work in Japan. So keep it in mind that. So what I'm trying to say is that always trying to adapt your way of doing your business, the way of having meetings. Always try to adapt that. And before meetings or before doing business in any countries, it's crucial to research what kind of corporate culture, what kind of professionals you are talking to. Simply, you can research that thanks to IT technologies, and you can Google it. So be prepared before doing something.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ken. Is
Well,
there
thank you so
anything you'd
much.
like to share with my audience before we head off for today?
Yeah, so since I'm helping entrepreneurs, particularly focusing on non-Japanese entrepreneurs, yeah, feel free to let me know if you have any concerns doing business in Japan, or if you have no idea how to incorporate company in Japan. I'm glad to help you anytime. It's not a promotion, but yeah, I can help you.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thank you for having me today.
I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. Be sure to check out the links in the description of this episode to learn more about Ken and his company, Ken One World Consulting. Please remember to go ahead and subscribe and leave a rating and review if you enjoy the podcast. And feel free to email me at businesssuccessjapan@gmail.com if you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes or interview topics. Also, be sure to reach out if you'd like to contribute as a guest on the podcast to share your own cultural insights into doing business in Japan. But for now, remember that the more you learn, the more confident you will become as you explore all of the opportunities Japan has to offer you. Until next time, mata kondo.